Hey all, so this is going to be my my last video upload and probably a pretty quick one. I'm just going to go over the final exam, what we're going to be doing with that. Um, to make this a little bit easier, I sent you guys, a lot of individualized feedback on your APA projects. Um, they were really good for the most part. You guys nailed down the concepts that I wanted you to, which was great. With this final exam, you're going to work on rolling all of that in together into a results section, which isn't going to be as difficult as it sounds. I mean, a results section, if you read through one, and I sent you a couple of examples to read through, use that Oswego link that I sent you a couple of weeks ago to see what a real results manuscript section looks like in APA style. Um, some will regard it as the easiest section of the paper to write, and it probably is because it more or less writes itself, as you guys know. I mean, every um, experiment that you report on is going to be analyzed with a specific test. That test is written up in a very specific way that you almost have a template for, and it just kind of continues on like that, maybe with some transition sentences to justify this experiment versus that experiment. But for the most part, the rest of that comes in other parts of the paper, which you're not going to be writing, right? So hopefully in 121 you wrote a research proposal, which most people take to be an intro and a method section, or at least an intro and a proposed method section. And then in 299, you're going to write a full-fledged manuscript from start to finish of some original research of your own. I thought the best way to bridge the gap is, I don't know if every 203 instructor does this, but is to have you write a results section. Now, normally, in non-pandemic semesters, I have you guys analyze the data yourselves, but given that it was difficult, nigh impossible to get everybody, with SPSS on their home computers in time. The way I approached this one is I ran the analysis on SPSS and then sent you guys the output. So you're doing a little bit less work than actually substantially less work than I've had my students do in previous semesters. But hopefully throughout the course of the semester, I've given you enough tools, screen shares, things like that, to kind of show you conceptually how to work through SPSS so that when you get to 299 and beyond, it won't be that much of an issue. So I'm not really worried about you guys. You guys have proven to be pretty proficient in terms of understanding what's going on. And you guys didn't have a ton of questions. So I went through my email. The reason I've actually saved the recording for today is I wanted to give you guys time to email me and to respond to the email that I sent you guys yesterday and maybe look at your grades and kind of get a sense if you had a general question for the class. So I'm going to go through the exam sheet and just kind of give you some pointers in terms of what I expect. First question, invariably, how long does this have to be? This is the perfect example of as long as it needs to be and not a word longer, but probably also not a word shorter. Results sections are usually, depending on the nature of the study, pretty darn short because they're the most, how do I want to put this? The most straightforward and templated section of the paper. I mean, they're all more or less written the same way, barring differences in journal to journal. Some journals combine results sections with others, but if you're doing it in APA style, results section should not be difficult to write. Generally, it's commonplace to start your results section with a first paragraph that covers most of your demographic data, specifically for the dependent variables that you're interested in, which is why for number one, I calculated for you all of the descriptive statistics there. You can report that right there in the first sentence. Our sample was 20 ex or current NFL players with a mean career length of so on and so forth. That can carry you through your first paragraph. I mean, that's probably going to be a third to half of a page right there. And then you can kind of roll into the tests. You guys have done a really good job of writing up these tests. So now all I really need you guys to work on is to make sure you're still doing that accurately and to make sure you're transitioning in a way that makes sense. So after that first paragraph of demographic information, you might say, to test whether NFL players who had access to a talk therapist had altered mood scores relative to those that don't, we performed an independent sample t-test. That independent sample t-test revealed so on and so forth. So you're justifying the experiment, briefly justifying the experiment, or at least telling the reader what you're studying. Remember your IV, your DV, and then the results of the test. There's a few different ways you can do that. in a way that makes sense. When you're writing a single statement like you guys have been doing for the past couple of weeks, it's a little bit easier to kind of just follow that template. When you're trying to fit it into a paper, things like transitions and punctuation and stuff like that actually starts to matter. So you have to kind of be a little bit clever about how you do it. But for the most part, you could treat each one of those numbered questions on your final exam sheet as its own paragraph, right? And then you should produce anywhere between 6 and 7 paragraphs, and then that's it. Call it a day. So I'm thinking on the length side of things, 6 to 7 paragraphs probably puts you at about a page and a half, 2 pages. Could go as long as 2.5 pages. That's probably fine. If you're going longer than that, I think you're probably writing too much. And if you're anything shorter than a page and a half, you might just be really concise. I'm not gonna poo-poo that right off the bat. I want to see what you do, but I think a page and a half to 2.5 pages ish should be about right in there. So ideally, the sweet spot is around 2 pages. Now, don't force your work into that 2-page box. If you have to write slightly more because it makes sense to you, that's fine. If you want to write slightly less because you're being super concise, totally fine. Really, the results section is you just reporting your statistics, what you found. You are not interpreting this. Okay, you're not accounting for any differences in one variable versus another. That is all left to your discussion section, which is why the results section in a lot of ways is the easiest section. You don't really have to explain much. You're just reporting, right? You are literally just giving people the facts. Shockingly hard sometimes for undergrads to do because you guys, your brain gets going. You start thinking, oh, that's really cool. This was significantly different. I want to explain it right here and I'm in the moment. No, you have to save that for the discussion section. You can't do that in your results section, at least not in APA style. So really focus solely on the presentation of your experiments in APA style in paragraph format. As far as the other formatting requirements, yes, your margins and stuff, obviously look after those and make sure they're 1 inch. I'm not going to mandate that you guys have a header or title page, not for this. I mean, you literally have a tenth of a paper. I don't need an abstract or anything like that. I really just want to make sure that you're nailing down the results section. So use that sample manuscript that I sent you. And if you want to practice the other aspects of APA formatting, your title page, your running header, you can do that. I'm not going to, it's not going to count for or against you. But, that all of that information is covered in that sample document that I sent you, which will be really, really helpful in this class and beyond, right? You also do not have to do, if you look at number 7, we really didn't get around to doing much effect size. If you want to add measures of effect size, they fall right after your p-value separated by a comma and then your period to end your statement. Cohen's d, r squared, eta squared, all of those are acceptable measures of effect size depending on the test you're using, but you don't have to do it for this. It's not going to be part of your grade. I'm just going to focus on grading what I sent you in your outputs. Mostly the reason we're not doing effect size is I don't want you guys to be saddled with too much math because you didn't do the analysis yourself. You're really working off of the outputs that I sent you, and that in and of itself can be a little bit difficult. And I just want to make sure that you guys can get through the really, really important stuff. I did post my PowerPoint on effect size, so if you're curious about the way it's calculated, what it actually represents, that's all on Canvas right now. It's also covered in the book. The way the book covers it, by the way, is really, really useful because at the end of each chapter, it talks about the measure of effect size that relates to the test that you were just taught. So in the t-test chapters and the z-test chapters, you'll see a lot of Cohen's d. Because Cohen's d is an effect size measure that's used commonly in between or within two group analyses, right? Whereas eta squared is usually more for multi-level variance-based designs, in other words, ANOVA. So that's that. But apart from that, one of the things I hope you guys do notice is that there is a tremendous amount of overlap between the output for this and for the project that I just sent you. Most of that data is exactly the same. And I did that because I want you guys to practice on pulling data from an output file, recognizing which numbers you need, which numbers are actually telling you what you need to know. One of the mistakes a lot of you guys made on the APA project, and I call this out for some of you, is that for number 1, which is an independent sample t-test, you pulled the p-value from Levine's test. be very, very careful about the headers in your output box. The Levine's test output box, for better or worse, is part of the independent sample t-test output box. And the reason they do it that way is because if Levine's test is significant, remember Levine's test tests for homogeneity of variance, then you've actually violated one of the key assumptions of the independent sample t-test, and you have to use the bottom line. The nice thing about SPSS is it rolls up both the parametric test and the non-parametric test into one output box. But in order to do that, it has to put the results from Levine's test in front so you know which line to read. That's why it's complicated. As a general rule of thumb, I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't think there are very many exceptions. Your p-value for the statistic that you are interested in will fall to the right of that statistic in SPSS, not to the left. Most of you guys pulled the p-value from the left. You are looking at the two-tailed sig that SPSS is calling it. That's your p-value for that test. A lot of you guys, probably 2/3 to 3/4 of you guys did it right, no problem. So the rest of you might have just made a mistake in terms of where you were looking. But, just make sure you fix that. Don't pull the wrong numbers. Contrast, treat them just like t-tests. They're really, really easy to read. There's always a box that tells you which coefficients were assigned for each contrast. So let's say you're looking at contrast 1 and it says, 1, 0, 1, 0, or 1, 0, negative 1, 0, sorry. Above that, usually in the header, there's a group that tells you which group goes with each of those coefficients. So you can tell, okay, well, 1, 0, negative 1, 0 is group A versus B is left out because 0. Negative 1, C, A versus C, and D is left out. Except those groups will actually be named for you in the output. So you'll see offensive line, blank, I think it's offensive skill, versus defensive line versus so on and so forth. So that contrast box tells you which analyses are included, or which groups, I should say, are included in your analyses. And then the contrast that you run will show up as, this is contrast 1. This is the first set of contrast coefficients. These are the results. This is contrast 2. You just treat those like t-tests. Real simple. I'll leave it to you guys whether you want to devote an entire paragraph to them. The two contrasts you can do together in one paragraph, or you can do it as part of your main effect ANOVA paragraph for that problem, because it's technically all part of the same problem. I personally would break it apart. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of good reason to do both main effect, post hoc, and contrast, unless you're working some really complicated multi-group analysis that's essential to your research and you can justify it that way. There's really no good reason to do that. So I don't think I had anything else specific to cover with you guys. Again, depending on how well your APA projects went or didn't go, this was going to be longer than it needed to be. But the real things I wanted to get out are obviously length, probably 1.5 to 2.5 pages, somewhere in there. The due date, right? So May 18th. I'm going to do you guys a solid, push it to the 19th, because I think I could turn these around a little bit quickly. I don't want this to interfere with any of your other finals. So if you have a final for later in that week, work on this first, and I'll turn it around real quickly for you. Because all of your other grades in, for the most part, except for a couple of stragglers who have yet to send me certain things, I can probably grade this for you in a couple of minutes and tell you what your final grade's going to be. I was just looking at the grade breakdown for both sections, and for the most part, it's really good. I'm on pace to give out more A's this semester than I think I ever have, which, again, might be the nature of, adjusted expectations for, this sort of online learning. I relaxed certain standards that I normally wouldn't relax, but it benefits you guys grade-wise, and I'm okay with that. All I ask is that going forward in 299 or even graduate school, if you guys have any stat-related problems, please feel like you can come back to me. I'm your first stat professor. I will help you guys, and anything that I haven't taught you that I think you might need to know down the line, I feel like it's still my duty to make sure you understand that. So don't be afraid to shoot me an email or ask for anything. I've had plenty of my 203 students in 299 turn around and ask me an email or come to my office hours with their laptop saying, I don't know how to analyze this data, or I don't know how to sort this data set or merge this data set. It's usually easy problems that we can fix real easily. So, but that's that. I'm going to keep open email communication lines, obviously, for the next few days. If you need anything, don't be afraid to send me an email. Don't be afraid to send me a text message. None of you guys do that, but I'm totally okay with it. It's actually a really great way to get my attention immediately. And as long as you're relatively concise and you explain your question thoroughly, I can usually give you a pretty quick answer. Last thing is, if you haven't turned anything in, I would do so as soon as you can, because I want to kind of get an idea of what everybody's grade is going into the final. I think a lot of you guys are going to be a lock for an A. So grading yours will obviously be pretty quick, at least in terms of how it's going to affect your final grade. There are a couple of people who are on the borderline of passing on passing. I suspect that they're probably going to take the ungraded option, but bear in mind with the ungraded option, in order to pass ungraded, you need at least a 65 average. I don't know if that's true for every class. This is a core class in psychology, so usually they up that threshold to a C minus. I believe you have to get a C minus in this class to pass it if you're taking a graded option. Still, most of you, 100% not going to be an issue. Even if your average is sitting at like a 74 right now, you would have to do worse on this final exam than your average by a fair bit to pull that down to where you wouldn't pass. And this is not the sort of exam where people do that poorly. I mean, usually the lowest grades tend to be in the C range in this. The in-class exam, exam 1, exam 2, those are the tougher assessments because they're very conceptual, they're very focused. This is very practical. Right? And I believe in practical exams for statistics because this is an applied discipline. You're going to be using this. So I'd prefer an exam that you're actually going to, that's getting you mileage towards where you want to go. That's my spiel on that. So yeah, just, shoot me an email if you have any questions or anything like that. It's been a pleasure teaching you guys this semester. I'm going to miss you all terribly this summer. I haven't heard from Dr. Vivona about 343 next semester and whether it's a go, but I am definitely teaching biopsych. If you guys are interested in that, if you haven't already enrolled in classes, I really do hope we get to do it in person. Not that those two classes are actually probably easier to teach online than this one, due to the fact that there's a technological component to this class that I can't really create a surrogate for if you guys don't have SPSS on your computer. But it's just more fun in person. They're two of my favorite classes that I teach. At TCNJ, but probably in general. And I've taught some other classes at Temple that were interesting as well. And these two are just my favorites. So if you take those classes, I can promise you we're gonna work hard, but we're gonna have a lot of fun. And yeah, that's it. I hope you guys have a wonderful summer. Thankfully, I looked at pause. I don't think we have any graduating seniors. So if you have any friends who are graduating seniors, be kind to them in the next few months. They're probably having a really hard time with, not getting the graduation experience that, a lot of you guys are probably going to get. Some of you guys are underclassmen, freshmen, sophomores. I saw a couple of juniors. Hopefully by then, COVID is something that we, look back on the rearview mirror on. So yeah, so best this summer, stay healthy, and hopefully we open to some good news in the fall. And don't be afraid to keep in touch or ask questions if you need anything. That's what I'm here for. So bye, guys.